While everyone's talking about the fiscal cliff, our next guest, House member Jeb Hensarling, he's a Republican from Texas. He is about to become the chair of the very powerful Financial Services Committee, and he is going to have his plate full on that one. Jeb Hensarling joins us now from Washington. As always, Congressman, welcome back. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you, Larry.
Before we get to your new post, let me just ask you this. There's a great article today in the Wall Street Journal op-ed page by a Nobel Prize winner, Edward Prescott. So he adds up all the federal and state income taxes, the payroll taxes, the state and local sales taxes. And he says the average effective tax rate in this country is now 40%. And he says it's hurting work effort and it's hurting consumption. My question is this. In this discussion of the cliff and raising taxes, does anybody talk about that, what this added burden is going to be?
Well, all the time. I mean, again, it is just a truism that Washington has a spending problem, not a taxing problem. And any of this talk, Larry, of taxation is, frankly, just a distortion from the huge fiscal abyss. I mean, the fiscal cliff is, frankly, a pothole relative to the size of our debt problem. You give President Obama every job-harming, economic retarding tax increase he's requested, that runs the government for maybe 8 or 9 days. I mean, our problem is a spending problem, principally driven by entitlement spending growing at 6 and 7 and 8%. And now I'm fearful that under the president's economic policies, the new norm is 1.5 to 2% GDP growth. That math doesn't add up.
Well,
it hurts workers.
That's the thing. You know, if that was the new norm, if I were in there, I wouldn't want to raise taxes. But I get your point. Let me ask you this. You're going to run the Financial Services Committee. It's an extremely important post. Extremely important post. Just in brief, sir, I'm sure you've thought about Dodd-Frank. I just want to get your basic take. What does Dodd-Frank mean to the financial system and to the economy as you see it, as you ascend to this position of chairman?
Well, I think the regulatory burden is huge, and what Dodd-Frank has done is, number one, not address the true root of the financial crisis of '08. Which was a lot of federal policies, frankly, that incented and cajoled and mandated financial institutions to loan money to people to buy homes that ultimately they couldn't afford to keep. It didn't help them financially. I know they're psychologically worse off. So, number one, Dodd-Frank didn't address the root cause. Second of all, it adds layers of just simply the sheer weight, volume, load, complexity, and uncertainty of the regulatory burden is a drag on our capital markets. We need economic growth. So besides fundamental tax reform, we ought to have federal policy that ensures that we have the deepest, most liquid, competitive, innovative, transparent capital markets the world has ever known. A huge part of our solution is economic growth through this robust capital markets, and Dodd-Frank is a huge drag on that because what it does is it simply empowers bureaucrats with great amounts of arbitrary, discretionary power. And if they were so smart, we wouldn't have gotten into the pickle in the first place.
Okay, just, many people say Dodd-Frank keeps too big to fail for the major banks. Will you seek to reform that?
Oh, absolutely, Larry. One of the most important things we need to do is to do everything we can to take this too big to fail genie and stick it back in the bottle. I mean, if you lose your ability to fail in America, you're going to lose your ability to succeed. And frankly, the close kissing cousin of too big to fail is crony capitalism, which allows the Solyndras of the world to be financed. And, you know, there's nothing here that a good dose of free market capitalism with a lot of transparency and some elements of personal responsibility couldn't bring us back robust economic growth and get a lot of people off unemployment checks onto paychecks.
Just last one, sir. The Volcker rule, you know, whether banks should trade for their own account or not, whether it's so-called hedging, whether it's private equity funds, banks trading for their own account. Will you seek to enforce the so-called Volcker rule, which would prevent them from trading for their own account and staying away from the high risk?
Well, I think if you use the term enforce, I mean, as part of the legislative branch, we're not in the enforcement business, but I don't see the compelling evidence where proprietary trading was, number one, related to the '08 crisis. Now, I know that you have to always look to future crises as well, but as I'm having a hard time seeing the nexus, and this rule is so convoluted, so complex, that ultimately end users are going to be affected. It's going to drive up the cost of capital. It's going to harm employment even even worse. It's one of these cases that, Larry, it really appears that the cure is worse than the illness,
right.
and the cure didn't even impact the original illness.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much. Currently House Republican Conference Chairman, soon to be Chairman of the Financial